Is there anything that's happened in the last few weeks, any slim read, however frail and minuscule, that gives you hope for our democracy?
Well, as it happens, I've been traveling quite a bit over the last few weeks, including in 3 swing congressional districts, 2 in New York, 1 in Michigan. People are very, very aware of what is going on in Washington. But the conversations I heard were not about democracy and fascism. They were about the very real impacts that things are having or about to have on people's lives.
Well, if by democracy we mean that the voters are going to keep in check the party that's in power, I think the withdrawal of Elise Stefanik's UN ambassador nomination shows that Republicans are not going to be in great shape in the House in the midterms and are likely to yield to a Democratic majority.
All right. I never thought I'd be saying this, but one of the happiest things I've seen in the last several weeks is the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, some of Jason's former colleagues, just with a torrent of criticism of Donald Trump. So for the record, I would like to align myself with the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about, no matter how hard we try and how much medication we take. I'm Dana Milbank, and this week we're talking about whether gravity is maybe, just maybe, starting to catch up with President Trump. I've started to sense the first cracks in MAGA unity. Some Senate Republicans were openly critical of the Signal chat fiasco. Senator Susan Collins chastised the administration for refusing to spend billions of dollars that were appropriated by Congress. And then there's Trump's truly impressive losing streak in the courts, with criticism coming from Republican-appointed judges as well as Democratic appointees. Trump is also coming in for rough treatment from various friendly news outlets, and business leaders aren't hiding their dismay over the economic chaos. To explore whether Trump's overreach is finally starting to catch up with him, I'm joined by 2 of my learned colleagues who never overreach.
I'm Karen Tumulty, and I'm a columnist here at the Post who normally writes about politics.
I'm Jason Willick. I'm a columnist at the Post. I write about politics and a lot of law these days.
Thanks for joining me today. So Trump has started this term on a bit of a revenge tour. His targeting of media outlets, universities, and law firms he doesn't like is having a chilling effect on speech, thought, and the justice system. While many are capitulating, a few are fighting back, and courts have issued temporary restraining orders against Trump more than 50 times. Is the judiciary making a brave stand against executive overreach? Or are radical left lunatic judges on rigged courts just delaying things until the Supreme Court hands Trump vast new imperial powers?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think some district court judges are overreaching. I think that many are not. I think that the Trump administration makes the point that there have been a lot of restraining orders and injunctions against it, but of course it's also issued a lot of executive orders. And our new form of government seems to be, executive order that is then litigated in the courts as Congress is a spectator, basically. So that gives people a lot to learn and write about the law. It's not ideal. It's not what the founders intended. And it puts judges in a hard position because they don't have as much guidance from Congress. They're interpreting presidents. But I could give a few examples, especially on judges saying who in the White House or who in the government can access what data, especially in sort of DOJ cases, as judges prematurely reaching into the executive branch's operations. I would cite other examples of judges performing an important function, like Judge Boasberg in D.C., requiring that migrants deported under the Alien Enemies Act receive due process. So it's really a mixed bag, and the Supreme Court so far is trying to stay out of it, but they won't be able to for much longer.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats are basically shut out of power in Washington, except in the courts. And these days, the front line of the Democratic resistance are actually the state attorneys general, who are, in fact, by the way, pursuing a strategy that was really pioneered by Republican attorneys general during the Obama administration of just bringing all kinds of issues to court and generally being pretty successful, although these cases are still working their way up. I was at a meeting of Democratic attorneys general about a month ago, and they think the first big case that they have filed that is going to make it to the Supreme Court will be the question of birthright citizenship.
Well, I'd just underscore how unfortunate it is that our system works this way, because state attorneys general are supposed to protect the interest of states, of their state specifically. But now they act as sort of roving partisan enforcers on any side of a legal issue. So they find a way to get into court for the Democrats against the administration, or vice versa, as Karen said, if it was under Obama or Biden, Republican attorneys general getting in against the Democratic administration's policies. But that's what you get when you have a passive Congress.
Right. I think that's exactly right. If we had a functioning Congress, it wouldn't be happening this way. So I started out by praising the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and now you're going to think something's really wrong with me because I'm going to praise the Federalist Society. But I mean, at this moment, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, so much is resting on the courts. I'm really feeling a bit of confidence that they're going to fulfill the role they need to protect democracy. I mean, you had the Chief Justice with this smackdown of Trump when he's talking about impeaching Judge Boasberg. I like the opinion I saw from Karen Henderson, who's a George W. Bush appointee, in that appellate ruling last week upholding Boasberg's restraining order. So, I get the feeling it'll get up to the Supremes and they'll say, all right, you can have your unitary executive theory and you can hire and fire heads of all these independent agencies. But it just seems to me that they're going to actually push back on the most egregious things that Trump is doing.
And then the question becomes, what happens if and when the Trump administration decides to defy a court order, especially if that court order is coming from the Supreme Court?
Well, and then we're going to have to increase the medication further.
First of all, what I would suspect would happen, is they would get pummeled by more than they otherwise would in the midterms. But ultimately, the courts depend on the political branches. But I do think the public would respect a Supreme Court ruling, especially a lopsided one. I think that Chief Justice John Roberts will be looking for ways to get most of his colleagues on board, whichever way they go on these issues. And I think the voters would really punish an executive in the midterm who tried to defy the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Speaking of midterms, let's talk a bit more about politics. Republicans in Congress have generally been going along with everything the Trump administration and DOJ have been doing. And the aforementioned Susan Collins has a long history of expressing concern, but then doing nothing about it. Is the mild criticism we're starting to see from some Republicans evidence that there may actually be a line that they won't let Trump cross, or some congressional power they won't cede to the executive? Karen, you have a thought on that?
Well, I think it's going to be what they are feeling at home and what they're hearing at home. And as I said, I spent week before last in 3 swing districts. And I can tell you, in 3 districts, I came across 4 Social Security offices that have been closed. And people really seem to understand what it means if Medicaid suddenly gets sharply cut. And twice, as I was traveling around with Mike Lawler, a Republican congressman from upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, at 2 small meetings that he had, people brought up the concerns of small businesses that their workforce is potentially going to be people who are rounded up and deported. And that especially came up in a little town that I was at, a little town named Spring Valley in the Hudson Valley, where 40% of the population was born in another country. And these small businesses are really worrying about what happens to their workforces with these deportation orders.
Yeah, I've been surprised at how passive the Senate caucus especially has been Republicans on nominees. I would have expected the House to basically treat Trump as sort of their party's leader in the House chamber and Mike Johnson as like a cabinet member. I would expect that, but the Senate has really surprised me. I think a question is, what are the leverage points. I think the way that our dysfunctional Congress tends to work now is what it can do to the executive is it can do subpoenas. And were Democrats to win, there's going to be an avalanche of subpoenas and fact-finding investigations in the House. But Republicans aren't going to do that. I don't think they're going to start subpoenaing the administration, but they need to decide what's their leverage point. Is it the reconciliation bill, or is it the threat of holding some kind of hearing? Because, they can ask nicely and say what they want the Trump administration to do, and it couldn't care less. So they're going to need to figure out some concrete legislative point of pressure.
Mm-hmm. I think it's all going to be about Trump's numbers. Jason mentioned earlier the Stefanik case. And if they're frightened, that's when they're going to push back. And, we saw, I think it was just last week, that plus 16 state Senate district in Pennsylvania went for a Democrat. And then we've got some elections happening this week. And I want to talk about those with our Poughkeepsie and Spring Valley correspondent, Karen, and with Jason. But first, we have to take a quick break. Welcome back. I'm Dana Milbank, and this is Impromptu. There are a few special elections happening Tuesday, and while these are local races, it will be one of the first major signs of how voters are responding to the political atmosphere. What are the stakes here, Karen?
Well, another place I've been in the last few weeks is Wisconsin, where there is a red-hot race for the state Supreme Court going on. And a few weeks ago, the two candidates, this is technically, theoretically, a nonpartisan race, but the two candidates, the liberal and the conservative, got together for their one and only debate. Now, inherently, electing judges is a political exercise, but I have to admit, I was really pretty stunned at this debate. It took place in a pretty small law school lecture hall at Marquette, and all 7 sitting justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court sat in the front row center of this debate. And then afterwards, 5 of these justices went into the spin room and stood there in front of the cameras and the microphones. And now you have Elon Musk. I haven't checked the statistics today, but he has poured $11 million into the race, into various PACs of his, and was there Sunday night in Green Bay handing out $1 million checks.
And dressed with a cheese head on.
Right. So, this Supreme Court race became sort of such a farce, really. And the interesting thing, too, is that the polling indicates people in Wisconsin are very aware of what the stakes are here, that, this could determine congressional district lines and the future of abortion rights, but they have very little knowledge of the two candidates themselves. It's almost like these candidates are beside the point in this race.
Well, Karen has followed the particulars of the race much more closely than I have, but I would just say the Republicans have created a coalition with Trump that relies a lot on low propensity voters in presidential elections, voters who might not show up at super specialized elections. And this is a reversal of how it used to be when Democrats relied on those voters. So that puts Republicans, in a very tough spot for races like this. And I expect that you'll have some sort of marginal Trump voters stay home unless they're really fired up by this candidate. And what we've found is these local candidates don't have the same power as Trump to bring people out to the polls. And last thing I would say is it's risky of Elon Musk to do this because he's sort of invested his own political muscle in it. And if the Republican loses, that will be seen as more of a rebuke of him than it otherwise would have.
Well, the other thing is how the outside political forces led by Elon Musk have undercut the candidate rather than bolstered him. Brad Schimmel, the conservative candidate, keeps insisting over and over and over again that he would rule dispassionately in legal cases just based on the facts of the law, even as a political action committee supported by Elon Musk is sending out mailers that say, we won the White House. Now it's time for us to win the courthouse. And Brad Schimmel will promote President Trump's agenda.
Yeah, and then if he does win, he has to wear around his neck the idea that Musk was throwing around $1 million checks out there to buy him the election. Yeah, I've given up making any kind of predictions in the Trump era. In these elections are no different, but I'm definitely seeing one thing that I think is real, and that there's a lot more energy coming right now on the left in terms of number of candidates getting into races, raising their hands, showing up at protests and at rallies. It wasn't there. It's been sort of a delayed reaction, but I think in the last few weeks, we're starting to see more of it.
There's something very different from the people who are showing up now than, say, the mass protests that we saw in 2017. Mm-hmm. What I kept hearing over and over again, and at one point I went to in Poughkeepsie, a town hall, where there were 800
She
people.
loves Poughkeepsie.
I do love Poughkeepsie. It's beautiful. But people are showing up, and what they are saying is, what can we do? They are asking what they can do, which is, to me, feels very, very different.
Yeah. All right, let's talk just a little bit of economy in here. Many business leaders thought that a Trump presidency would be a great boon for them. Now, tariffs are set to escalate with Liberation Day on Wednesday. Consumer and producer sentiment is diving, as is the stock market. Recession forecasts are increasing, and so are warnings about the dreaded stagflation. Jason, do you think any of this will provoke a turnaround for Wall Street types and industry titans who have gone all in for Trump?
Yes, I think it already is. I think you're seeing some more people going mum who might have been more affirmatively supportive, but I think they still want to retain some influence over him so they don't feel like he can just ignore them. And I think there is some hope among those types probably that if they complain quietly or increasingly loudly, they'll get Trump to back off, as he has been shown to do on tariffs before. He's very impulsive on that subject.
And in fact, you continue to hear from people in the business community and from elected officials, Republican elected officials, oh, this is just a negotiating position. He's the, ultimate deal maker using his leverage. But I think that they're going to have to face the fact that Trump just loves tariffs.
So you're pretty sure Liberation Day is happening?
Well, at this point, we're counting down the hours, aren't we?
Maybe we're going to hear some new concessions from our trading partners at the last minute that get them to pull the tariffs. But at some point, you can only pull that walking up to the brink and then pulling out an agreement so many times before it loses its credibility as a threat.
Mm-hmm. And the real question, as always, is how will it play in Poughkeepsie? With that, we've got to wrap this up. Thank you both for joining this episode of Impromptu.
Thanks, Dana. Jason, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Dana. Hope you don't need more medication.
It's too late. This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Damir Marusic and Chris Sulentrop, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know what you think about our conversation today. Send an email to impromptu@washpost.com. And if you're enjoying the show, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. See you next week.